Most of the adults I work with are walking around running outdated software in the background of their mind that was written when they were just 8 years old. They don't even realize it's still running back there. They just think it's their personality. And that gap between those two is where almost all of our suffering, all of our anxiety, and all of our struggle lives. And today we're going to talk about it in the form of operant conditioning. Now, yes, I know that sounds like something your school psychology teacher said right before you fell asleep, but stick with me. There was this guy, B.F. Skinner, and he figured something out in the 1950s that will sound obvious until you apply it to yourself. And here it is. When you do something and something good happens, your brain does it more. When you do something and something bad happens, your brain does it less. That's the whole thing. Your brain has been running this calculation your entire life. The problem is, most of the really important calculations happened when you were a kid, in a house that no longer exists, around people who may have had absolutely no idea what they were doing to your subconscious mind, your nervous system, or your sanity. Sorry, that last part might sting a little. The other thing to know is that none of this is conscious. Your brain isn't sitting there logically thinking through the math every single time you make a decision. The math already happened years ago, and that answer got stored as a pattern. And now that pattern just runs all on its own in the background without even asking your permission. I know. How rude. In fact, a rat in a Skinner box presses a lever and gets food. Pretty clean deal, right? Rat presses lever, rat gets cheese. And a lot of people I work with are still pressing that lever that stopped giving anything useful out around 1992. No cheese, yet they're still pressing. Here's where this stops being a psychology lesson and starts being personal and starts being real. A kid who performs and gets warmth and approval learns that achievement produces love and acceptance, and the brain files that and runs it forward. Now, the same person is a 45-year-old who can't stop working, cannot take a real vacation without their chest tightening, and can't sit quietly for 10 minutes without feeling like something is wrong with them or waiting for the next shoe to drop. They don't think of themselves as conditioned, though. They call themselves driven, ambitious, and they are those things. They're also running a program that says stillness is dangerous and rest is falling behind and being a failure. I had a client, a woman in her late 40s, successful by every measure you can see from the outside. She came in because she hadn't been able to genuinely relax in years. It wasn't a sleep issue. She slept just fine. She just couldn't sit down without her brain immediately treating it like a personal failure. Even when she'd go on vacation, she couldn't turn her mind off. When we did the subconscious work together, what came up was her mom. Her mom wasn't a bad person, though. She wasn't cold or distant. She was actually a pretty loving mother. But the version of her mom that showed up when my client was achieving something, producing something, doing something that, well, I'll say that version was noticeably warmer than the version that showed up when she wasn't. Now, nobody in the house ever said, "We only love you when you're productive." Nobody had to. That pattern said it for them. And her brain filed that away at the age of around 8 or 9 years old, and it's been running it on repeat ever since. Production equals warmth, rest equals nothing. She was 47 years old, and her mind still hadn't updated the program. Now, here's the part that explains why some of these patterns are so much harder to break than others. In a predictable household, the rules make sense. You do the right thing, good things happen. You cross a line, there are consequences. Even if those rules were strict, the nervous system and the subconscious mind could figure them out. It could learn the game. But in a home where a parent was drinking or raging or just completely unpredictable, the rules changed constantly. Sometimes being good worked, sometimes it didn't. Sometimes the parent was warm and present, and sometimes they weren't, and nobody could explain why. The child in that household kept trying to crack the code. If I'm just good enough, quiet enough, helpful enough, maybe today will be better, maybe today will be a good day. Sound familiar? I know it does for me too. What psychologists call this, though, is variable ratio reinforcement. In plain English, you got rewarded sometimes, not every time, not on any predictable schedule, just sometimes. Randomly enough to keep going. That is exactly how slot machines work. You don't win every pull, you don't win on a schedule, you just win enough that your mind never stops pulling the lever. B.F. Skinner found out that this type of conditioning is the hardest kind to break. Not because a person is weak, but because their brain is doing exactly what it was designed to do. This is why adult children of alcoholics have patterns that are really stubborn. The people pleasing, the hypervigilance, the constant scanning of every room you walk into to check if everyone is okay. These weren't installed by a clean, predictable conditioning. They were installed in your mind by a nervous system that learned to never stop trying because it never knew when trying was going to work. You know, this isn't a character flaw, though. This is your nervous system and your mind that survived something genuinely hard. Let me translate some of this into plain English, because once you hear it, you're going to recognize yourself or someone you know immediately. Let's start with people pleasing. At some point in childhood, making the people around you happy produced safety, it produced warmth. A night that didn't go sideways and making them unhappy produced the opposite. So your mind locked in that rule. And now you're an adult and you're apologizing for things that you had nothing to do with. You know exactly which apologies I'm talking about. You can probably think of a half a dozen that happened today. Conflict avoidance is another one. Conflict in the house produced something the nervous system and the mind decided was dangerous. Explosive anger, days of silence, and that particular tension where nobody said what was actually happening. So the mind learned to root around that conflict entirely. And now you agree with things you completely disagree with. You let things go that you shouldn't let go of. And then 6 months later, you're quietly furious at everyone and you're not sure why. Another pattern is chaos seeking. This one surprises people. In some homes, the calm periods were actually more threatening than the chaotic ones because calm meant the explosion hadn't happened yet. The mind and the nervous system got so used to waiting for things to go wrong that it started feeling uncomfortable when they didn't. So some of you feel more anxious when everything is going well than when things are actually falling apart. And I want you to know your mind, it's not broken. It's just learned the wrong definition of what was normal and safe. And productivity compulsion is just the performance reward loop running in a grown adult's body. Doing equals being okay. Resting equals something is wrong. Nobody decided to be that way. The math had just got filed in the wrong decade. So here's where the smart, self aware people get stuck, which is I see where it came from. I understand the whole thing. So why am I still doing it? Well, you're doing it because understanding the pattern and changing the pattern are two completely different operations. And this is where most approaches get it wrong. Pavlov, you might have heard of him before, had a dog. He rang a bell every time he fed the dog, and eventually the dog started salivating just from the bell, even when there was no food coming. If you could sit that dog down and explain that the bell is just a bell, the dog would probably look at you very politely and then salivate anyway. Because that response doesn't live where explanations live. Your conditioned responses run in a part of your brain that's much older than the part that reads self help books or sits in therapy. And that older part doesn't care how much you understand it, it just runs the program on autopilot. So remember the client I mentioned, the one who couldn't relax? By the time she came to see me, she had done years of therapy. She understood her mother's dynamic better than most clinicians I've met. And yet, she still couldn't sit on her couch on a Sunday afternoon without her brain treating it like a problem. Because understanding the conditioning and updating the conditioning, those are not the same thing at all. The conditioning lives in the subconscious. That's the only place the update can actually happen. And this is where I do the bulk of my work. What I do is I work at a level where these patterns actually have gotten stored. In a session, we're not going over the pattern one more time. We're giving the subconscious a genuinely different experience, one where the old association gets interrupted and new ones are allowed in. And the person doesn't have to be in some deep Hollywood style trance for that to work. That's one of the bigger myths in this field of hypnosis and hypnotherapy. And I made it my personal mission to be really annoying about it until more people understand it. And for the hypnotist watching this, every client pattern has an installation story. So when you see people doing people pleasing, ask what was being rewarded and what was being punished. When you see productivity compulsion in your clients, ask what happened during rest. And when you see conflict avoidance, ask what conflict produced in the original environment. That conditioning framework is your map. The subconscious work is how you're actually getting there. Now, if you want to dive deeper into this, you can get my mental playbook, which helps you break the trance you didn't even choose and you can start running your own mind. Take a look in the link of the description of this video, and you're also going to find everything else there from working with me to all of my training programs and even additional tips, tricks, and resources. And make sure you subscribe if this landed for you. I put this out regularly because people deserve to understand what's actually driving their behavior and, more importantly, what can change it. I'm Dan Candell, and as always, be well, do good, and be true to who you are. Happy healing.